Three men are climbing a mountain in the dark. They are tired. They are confused. The one leading them has been saying strange things lately, things about suffering, about dying, about a cross. And now, near the top, in the thin, cold air, where the world goes quiet, they watch something happen that none of them will ever be able to put fully into words for the rest of their lives. The face of the man they have followed begins to shine. Not glow, not reflect. Shine, like the sun looked at directly. His clothing turns white, whiter than anything on earth could ever be scrubbed or bleached, and the light does not come from anywhere outside him. It comes from within, and then, standing in that light, talking with him, as easily as old friends, are two men. Two men who are dead. One of them is Moses, who died more than 1,000 years before any of these three climbers were even born. God buried him himself, in a valley, in a grave no human being has ever found. The other is Elijah, the prophet who never tasted an ordinary death at all, but was swept up into the sky in a chariot of fire, while a younger man watched and screamed after him. Neither of these two has ever met Peter. Neither has ever met James or John. There are no introductions on that mountain. Nobody hands out names. And yet Peter, a fisherman, a man with no schooling, a man who spoke before he thought his entire life, looks at these two figures blazing in the light, and he knows exactly who they are. He says it out loud. "Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He names them. Stop and feel the weight of that for a second. Peter recognizes 2 men he has never seen. 2 men from 2 different centuries. 2 men who lived and died before he drew his first breath. And he knows them on sight, the way you would know your own mother's face across a crowded room. Here's what most people read right past. The text never explains how. It doesn't say Jesus turned and made introductions. It doesn't say a voice announced their names. Scripture just reports the recognition the way you'd report that the sun came up, as an ordinary, obvious fact. As if, of course, Peter knew them. As if that's simply how it works on the other side of that light. And that quiet little assumption, sitting there in the story, unargued and unexplained, that is the thread we are going to pull on today. All the way, from the front of the Bible to the very last page. But before we do, I need you to notice something almost nobody notices. There were 4 men on that mountain, not 3. Peter spoke. Jesus shone. Moses and Elijah talked. But there was a 4th man standing therein, that impossible light, and he did not say a single word. He just watched. He watched 2 dead men walk out of glory and stand there, fully themselves, fully known. And what that silent man saw on the mountain, that night would follow him for the rest of his long, long life, down off the mountain, through decades of loss, all the way to a lonely island, a violent vision, and a voice he had heard once before. We're going to come back to that man, but not yet, because first, we have a question to answer. The oldest question in the human heart. The one you have asked, whether you said it out loud or not, if you have ever stood beside a grave and watched them lower someone you loved into the ground. Will I see them again? And if I do, will I even know them? This is not a story about clouds. This is not a story about harps. This is not a story about streets of gold and gates of pearl. This is a story about a face. The one face you were sure you would never get to see again. And the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, has far more to say about that face than you have ever been told. Because here is something the Bible almost never stops to argue, because it seems to treat it as too obvious to argue. Yes, Scripture paints heaven as a place, golden, radiant, real. But listen to how often, when the sacred writers reach for what makes it home, they reach not for the marble and the gold, but for people. Waiting, gathering, being recognized, being named. Again and again, the picture underneath the picture is a reunion. So today, we're not going to talk about heaven in the abstract. We're going to walk through the actual reunions, the specific, named, face-to-face meetings the Bible describes, one at a time. And they build. Each one goes further than the last, until we arrive at the one detail, near the end, that I promise will be hard to hear, without something breaking open in your chest. Let's start at the beginning. with 3 words, so easy to skim, that most people who have read the Bible their whole lives have never once stopped on them. You have probably stood there yourself, maybe not at a mountain, maybe at a hospital bed, in that hour when the machines go quiet. Maybe at a graveside on a gray afternoon, holding a handful of dirt you did not want to let fall. And somewhere in that moment, underneath the grief, a question rose up in you that you may have been almost ashamed to ask. Will I see them again? And when I do, will they still be them? Will my mother still be my mother? Will the friend I lost still know me? Or do we all just dissolve into some glowing, nameless ocean of light where nobody remembers the life they lived? Most people assume the Bible is either silent on this or hopelessly vague about it. It is neither. So let's walk through the reunions, one by one, in the order that builds the case. And I promise you, where the text gets hard or where it goes quiet and refuses to give us the answer we most want, I am not going to smooth it over. I'll show you that too. The first reunion is hiding in 3 words most people have read 100 times and never once slowed down on. Go back to the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, chapter 25. Abraham is old now. He has lived his entire long life chasing a promise across a desert. He buried his wife Sarah in a cave he paid for, with his own money, weeping over her body in a foreign land. He watched his son Isaac grow into a man, and now his own time has come. Here is what the text says. Then Abraham breathed his last, and died in a good old age, an old man, and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Gathered to his people. At first, that just sounds like a poetic way of saying he was buried. But watch what the story actually does with it. Abraham is gathered to his people first, and only after that, in the very next verse, do his sons Isaac and Ishmael carry his body to the cave and bury it. The gathering and the burial are 2 different events. One happens to the person, the other happens to the body. And they don't happen at the same time. Now here is the detail that should stop you cold. Abraham's people, his ancestors, his family, were not buried in that cave. His father Terah died hundreds of miles away, back in a city called Haran, and was buried there. Abraham is not being gathered to a family tomb. There is no family tomb. He is being gathered to a family, to people, to the ones who went ahead of him. The Hebrew phrase is nazaf elamav, and the verb at the heart of it is asaf. It does not mean to bury. It means to gather in, to collect, to bring scattered things back together into one place. It is the word a farmer uses for gathering in the harvest. It is the word you use for bringing home people who have wandered far away. And the Bible uses this exact phrase again and again and again, like a refrain it wants you to catch. Isaac is gathered to his people. Jacob is gathered to his people. Aaron, on the top of a mountain, is gathered to his people. Moses, the same Moses who would one day stand blazing on the Mount of Transfiguration, is told by God that he, too, will be gathered to his people. Every single time, the gathering is something that happens to the person. The body goes down into the ground, but the person goes somewhere. And at that somewhere, the text quietly insists there are people, his people, waiting. This is the very first hint the Bible gives us about what death is. And it is planted right there at the beginning, before there is any developed doctrine, before there is any theology of the afterlife written down. And notice, it is not a hint about vanishing into a void. It is a hint about coming home to a full house. And this is where it gets remarkable, because the next reunion isn't a quiet phrase buried in an old genealogy. The next one comes out of the mouth of a grieving father on the worst night of his life, and it is one of the most stunning things anyone says in the entire Old Testament. His name is David. Yes, that David, the shepherd boy who killed the giant, the king, the man after God's own heart. And in the book of 2 Samuel, we find him at the lowest point a human being can reach. His newborn son is dying. For 7 days the child burns with fever, and for 7 days David will not eat. He lies on the bare ground, night after night, refusing food, refusing comfort, pleading with God for the boy's life. His servants are frightened. They hover at the edges of the room. And when the child finally dies, they are too afraid to even tell the king, because they are certain the news will shatter him completely. They whisper to each other, "He wouldn't listen to us when the boy was alive. How can we possibly tell him now that he's dead?" It might destroy him, but David sees them whispering, and he understands, and he asks them, plainly, "Is the child dead?" "Yes," they tell him. "He's gone." And now David does something that makes no sense to anyone watching. He gets up off the ground. He washes. He puts on fresh clothes. He goes into the house of the Lord, and he worships. Then he comes home and asks for a meal, and he eats. His servants are bewildered. They can't hold it in. While the child was alive, they say, "You wept and starved yourself. Now that he's dead, you get up and eat?" It's backwards. It makes no sense. And David gives them an answer, so quiet and so certain that it has echoed for 3,000 years. "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, 'Who knows whether the Lord will be gracious to me, that the child may live?' But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. I shall go to him." Sit with that sentence for a moment, because David is not saying the baby is coming back. He knows he isn't. He says it plainly, "He shall not return to me." That door only swings one way. But David is saying that he, David, is going to go to where the boy now is. He is speaking of a place, a destination, a somewhere his infant son has simply gone ahead to. And David fully, calmly, expects to follow and to find him there. This is not a man numbing his pain with a pretty saying about memories living on. This is a father who believes, with total certainty, that death did not end the relationship. It only interrupted it. Death is a door his little boy walked through first. And one day, David will walk through that same door, and the child will be on the other side. But here is what you must not miss. The entire comfort of that sentence, every ounce of the peace that let David stand up and wash his face and eat, rests on one silent assumption. It only works if David expects to know the boy when he gets there, because a reunion with a stranger is not a reunion. If David walks through that door and finds only an anonymous soul among a billion anonymous souls, then he has not gone to his son at all. He has gone to a crowd. The whole thing collapses. The peace evaporates. What makes it comfort? What makes it hope instead of grief dressed up in religious language is the unspoken certainty that the boy will still be the boy and that David will know his face the instant he sees it. Scripture puts these words in the mouth of Israel's greatest king, and it offers no correction, no footnote, no gentle, "Of course, David didn't really understand the afterlife." It simply lets the words stand as true. 2 reunions so far. One hidden in a Hebrew phrase about a harvest. One spoken by a father who lost a child and refused to call it goodbye. And we are only getting started. So far, every reunion we've looked at has been quiet. A phrase about a harvest. A grieving father's steady sentence. Hints and assumptions the Bible drops, without ever stopping to explain them. But now we come to the moment when Jesus himself pulls back the curtain. And what he shows us is not a hint. It is a scene, vivid, detailed, almost impossibly specific about what happens the moment after a person dies. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, Jesus tells the story of 2 men. One is rich, dressed in purple and fine linen, feasting in luxury every single day. The other is a beggar named Lazarus, laid at the rich man's gate, covered in sores, so hungry he longs just for the scraps that fall from the rich man's table. Dogs come and lick his wounds. That is his whole life. Pain and hunger and being stepped over, day after day, by a man who has everything and shares nothing. Notice one small thing before we go further. The beggar has a name, Lazarus. It is the only parable Jesus ever tells in which he gives a character a name, and the name means God is my help. The rich man, for all his purple and all his feasting, is never named at all. Hold on to that. It will matter more than it seems. Both men die, and here is what's striking about the way Jesus tells it. This is a story he is teaching, not filing a report from the far side of death. But watch the details he chooses to build that story out of. He doesn't paint the dead as vague, drifting shadows. In the picture Jesus draws, the dead are awake. aware, themselves. And he tells it calmly, matter-of-factly, as though this is simply the shape of things, because to him, it was. The beggar is carried by angels to a place the text calls Abraham's bosom, an old Jewish way of picturing the resting place of the righteous dead, held close in honor at the side of the father of the faith. And the rich man opens his eyes in torment. And then comes the detail that changes how we have to read this entire subject. The rich man looks up, and across a great and fixed distance, he sees Abraham. And beside Abraham, he sees Lazarus. And he recognizes both of them. Stay with me here, because this is easy to skim and impossible to unsee once you catch it. The rich man knows Abraham, a patriarch who died roughly 2,000 years before the rich man was ever born. A man he could not possibly have met in life, no photograph of him anywhere, no portrait, nothing. And he knows him on sight. And he knows Lazarus, the very beggar who used to lie at his gate, the man he had spent his whole life stepping over as if he were part of the pavement. He even calls out to him, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue." He remembers the beggar's name. The man he ignored for years, he knows his name. His memory is intact. His identity is intact. Death did not dissolve him into some blank, forgetful haze. He is still, unmistakably, himself. And then the story does something that I think is one of the most heartbreaking turns in anything Jesus ever said. Abraham tells him no, the water cannot come, and he explains why, and this is where the picture gets almost unbearable. "Between us and you," Abraham says, "there is a great chasm fixed, so that those who would pass from here to you cannot, and none may cross over from there to us." A great chasm, fixed, not a wall you might climb, not a river you might one day swim, a fixed distance, and the terrible thing about it is not that the two men are far apart. It's that they can still see each other. The rich man can look across and see the very comfort he will never reach. Recognition is fully intact. It's the crossing that's gone. And now watch what the rich man does with the little he has left. He stops asking for himself. He says, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment." 5 brothers. He remembers them, every one of them. He knows they are still alive, still back home in his father's house, still living the exact life he lived, and the thought of them ending up where he is now is a second torment laid on top of the first. Here is a man in agony, and the thing that rises up in him is not just his own thirst. It is fear for the people he loves. He remembers his family. He remembers his father's house. He can picture the table he grew up at, the brothers he grew up beside. And from across a chasm he cannot cross, with a voice he cannot make them hear, he is desperate, desperate, to reach them one more time. Think about what that means. This is grief in the mouth of the dead, not the grief of those who are left behind, the grief of the one who has gone ahead, still loving, still remembering, still reaching back toward the ones he can no longer touch. The love did not switch off when he died. If anything, it burns hotter now, sharpened by the knowledge of what he wasted and the fear of losing them, too. Whatever else this passage is, it is not a picture of the dead forgetting us. It is a picture of the dead remembering us, with an intensity we can barely imagine. But here's the part nobody tells you. Jesus did not need any of this to make his point. The story is about wealth and mercy and the terrible cost of ignoring the suffering man at your gate. He could have made every bit of that point without a single name, without the memory of the brothers, without the mutual recognition across the divide. None of it, not one detail of it, was necessary for the moral, and yet Jesus put all of it in anyway. Why? Because that is simply how he understood the state of the dead to be. He was not building a doctrine of the afterlife here. He was assuming one, leaning on it, treating it as so plainly true that he could rest an entire parable on top of it, while making a completely different point. To Jesus, the idea that people remain themselves, that they know each other, that they remember the ones they left behind, was not a claim to be argued. It was the furniture of reality. And this lines up exactly with the world Jesus was speaking into. By the 1st century, most Jews, and especially the Pharisees, firmly believed that the person survives death and that the dead would one day rise again. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in that very century, records that the Pharisees held that souls have the power to survive death and that the righteous would live again. So Jesus is not smuggling in some strange new invention here. He is confirming, with the authority of God himself, the hope his people already carried in their bones, and then filling that hope with specific, personal, unforgettable detail. But I promised you I'd be honest, where the text is honest. And right about here is where somebody always pushes back, because there is one passage people love to throw at all of this. It deserves a careful, honest hearing. So let's give it one. One day a group called the Sadducees comes to Jesus with a trap. Now, the Sadducees didn't even believe in the resurrection, so this is not a sincere question, it's a setup. They describe a woman who was married to 7 brothers, one after another, each of them dying in turn. And then they spring it. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? All 7 had her. They think they've found the absurdity that breaks the whole idea. And Jesus answers them in the Gospel of Luke. The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are counted worthy to attain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. For they cannot die anymore, because they are equal to the angels and are sons of God. Now some people read that and slam the book shut. See, they say, no marriage in heaven. All our earthly bonds erased. We won't even know each other. But look at what Jesus actually says. And more importantly, look at what he does not say. He says the institution of marriage, the marrying, the giving in marriage, does not carry on the same way in the age to come. He is answering a narrow legal question about who legally belongs to whom. He does not say the people forget each other. He does not say the love is deleted. He does not say a husband and wife become strangers who pass each other like they never met. Not one word of that. He is telling the Sadducees that the whole framework of their little trap belongs to this age, not the next. And then Jesus does something brilliant. He doesn't just defend the resurrection. He proves it, and he proves it by pointing straight at identity that survives death. He reminds them how God introduced himself to Moses at the burning bush. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And then Jesus lands it. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. For to him, all are alive. Do you feel the force of that? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had all died centuries before Moses ever stood at that bush. And yet God does not say, I was their God. He says, I am, present tense, because to him, they are not gone. They are alive, and they are still Abraham, still Isaac, still Jacob, named, distinct, themselves. Jesus' entire proof of the resurrection rests on the fact that individual people keep their individual identities on the other side of death. So the very passage people use to argue that we lose each other turns out to contain one of the strongest statements in the whole Bible, that we keep our very selves. There's one more line people raise, so let me name it too. In the book of Isaiah, God says of the new creation that the former things shall not be remembered, nor come to mind. Some take that to mean we'll forget everything, the people, the lives, all of it. But read it where it sits. The former things Isaiah is describing, right there in the same passage, are the weeping and the distress and the calamities of the old broken world. It is the pain that will not be remembered, not the persons. God is not promising to erase your mother from your memory. He is promising to erase the grief. 3 reunions now. Abraham gathered to his people, David going to his son, and a rich man in torment who, even there, even then, even across a chasm he could never cross, could not forget a single face, or a single name, or a single one of the people he loved. And we still haven't reached the one that changes everything. If this is opening up the Bible for you in a way you haven't seen before, if you're sitting there realizing Scripture says far more about this than anyone ever told you, do me one small favor. Take a second right now to subscribe and leave a comment telling me, who is the one person you are most hoping to see again? say their name below. That one small action is how this study reaches the next person who is grieving tonight and doesn't yet know the Bible has something to say to them. And then don't go anywhere, because what comes next is the moment it all turns. Everything we've seen so far has been, in a sense, secondhand. A phrase in an old genealogy, a father's confidence, a story Jesus told about two men on the far side of death. But there is one moment in all of history where this stops being secondhand. One moment when a person actually died, really died, buried in a tomb, with a stone rolled across it, and then came back. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, came back in a body you could touch. And we get to stand in the room and watch how the people who loved him responded. I'm talking about the morning Jesus walked out of his own grave. And the first thing you need to see is this. When he came back, he was unmistakably the same person. He still had the wounds. He shows the nail marks in his hands to the disciples locked in that upper room. He shows them the wound in his side. He eats a piece of broiled fish in front of them, just to prove he is not a spirit. Later, on a beach at dawn, he builds a fire and cooks them breakfast. This is not a vague, glowing apparition. This is a body that eats, a body that can be touched, a body still carrying the scars of everything it went through. The man who walked out of that tomb was the same man who was nailed to that cross. Continuity is written all over him. But I promised you I would be honest wherever the text is honest. And here, the text hands us something strange. Something that, at first, seems to cut against everything we've been building. Because sometimes, right at the start, Jesus was not recognized. Go to the tomb, early that first morning. Mary Magdalene is standing outside it, weeping. She has lost everything. The man who cast the darkness out of her, the man who gave her back her life, is dead, and now even his body is gone. And through her tears she sees a man standing there, and she assumes he's the gardener. She looks straight at the risen Christ, and does not know him. She actually begs this gardener to tell her where they've taken the body, so she can go and carry it away herself. And then Jesus says one word. Mary. Her name. Just her name. And in that instant, everything turns. She knows him. She spins around and cries out, Rabboni, teacher. The fog tears away in a single syllable, and the woman, who thought she was talking to a stranger, is suddenly on her knees in front of the man she loved most in all the world. The same thing happens that same day on a dusty road to a village called Emmaus. Two of Jesus' followers are walking home, crushed, talking through their grief, trying to make sense of a weekend that destroyed them. And Jesus himself comes up and walks beside them, and they don't recognize him either. For hours, they walk, they talk, they pour out their broken hearts to this stranger about the very man standing right next to them. And only at the end, when they sit down to eat, and he takes the bread and breaks it, in that one familiar gesture, their eyes are opened and they know him. And the instant they know him, he vanishes from their sight. Now, here's the part most people rush past. Luke does not leave this a mystery. He tells us exactly what was going on. He writes, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. Held. Restrained. Kept. Do you see what that means? The problem was never that Jesus had become unrecognizable. The problem was on their end. Their eyes were being deliberately held back, kept from seeing what was standing right in front of them the whole time. And the moment that restraint was lifted, recognition was instant. Total. Undeniable. They knew him at once. Recognition was always possible. It was simply being managed by God for a purpose and released at exactly the right moment. So the resurrection body is both things at once. It is genuinely, physically the same person, scars and all. And it is glorified, lifted beyond the old limits, in a way that can be veiled and unveiled at God's choosing. Continuity and transformation held together. And Paul reaches for a picture to help us hold both. In 1 Corinthians 15, he says the body that dies is like a bare seed you drop into the ground. And the body that rises is like the plant that comes up out of it. Think about a seed and the flower it becomes. They don't look identical, but they are not two different things, either. The flower is what the seed always was, unfolded, opened up, finally complete. You are the seed, and the person you will be on the other side is the same you brought, at last, into full bloom. Which brings us to the single clearest sentence in the entire Bible about what we will know over there. It comes from Paul, right in the middle of the most famous chapter about love ever written. 1 Corinthians 13. For now we see in a mirror, dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. But then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. I want to slow all the way down here, because Paul chooses two different words for know, and the difference matters. When he says, now I know in part, the Greek word is ginosko, ordinary knowing, partial, limited, blurry. But when he says, then I shall know fully, he changes the word. He reaches for a stronger one, epiginosko. That little prefix, epi, intensifies it. It carries the sense of knowing thoroughly, knowing completely, all the way through. Now, Paul's main point here is not a technical lecture about eyesight in heaven. His point is about the direction of it all. And notice which direction he says it runs. Our knowing does not shrink when we cross over. It grows. Right now, in this life, we are squinting at each other through a foggy, warped, ancient mirror, catching only pieces of the people we love, their surface, their moods, the parts they let us see. But then, on the other side, Paul says we will know fully, even as we ourselves have always been fully seen by God. And think about what that has to include. If your knowing of everything grows clearer on the other side, then your knowing of the people you love does not get erased in the light. It gets clearer, too. Do you feel how that flips the whole fear around? The thing we're all secretly afraid of is that heaven will be so strange, so bright, so overwhelming, that we'll lose each other in it, that your mother will become a stranger, that the faces you love will blur into the crowd. But Paul says the danger runs the other way. You will not know her less. You will know her more. For the first time in your life, you will actually know your mother completely, without the fog, without the distance, without all the parts of each other we spend our whole lives never quite reaching. Not a fainter version of the people you love, a truer one. Now, remember the fourth man? The one on the mountain, at the very beginning, who never said a word. Who just stood in the impossible light and watched two dead men, Moses and Elijah, appear, fully themselves, fully recognized, talking with the Lord, as though death had been nothing more than a doorway between friends. That man was John, and John never forgot what he saw on that mountain. He carried it with him through everything that came after, through the cross, through the empty tomb, through decades of preaching and loss, through watching nearly every friend he had die for the faith, one by one, until he was an old man, the last one left. And at the end of his long life, they exiled him. They put him on a small, harsh, volcanic island in the middle of the sea, alone. A place called Patmos. And there, on that lonely rock, this old man, the last living eyewitness of the mountain, the empty tomb, all of it, falls to the ground. Because a vision opens over him so overwhelming he cannot stay standing. And out of that vision comes a voice. And it is the same kind of voice that once said Mary in a garden, the same voice that once shone on a mountain, and it says to the old man on the ground two words. Fear not. The man who witnessed the first reunion, two dead saints, recognized on sight, became the man who was given the vision of the last one. Because it is John, there on Patmos, who writes down the final promise in the whole Bible about what waits for us. Revelation, chapter 21. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. Stop and think about what that gesture actually requires. To have a tear wiped from your eye, you have to be there. You have to be a real, particular person with a real face and a real memory of exactly why you were weeping. God is not deleting the you that grieved. He is not erasing the mother who lost a child or the child who lost a mother. He is coming close, close enough to reach your face, and with his own hand, he is ending the grief for good. The same John who watched two dead men stand fully alive on a mountain is the one God chose to show us that the story ends not with forgetting, but with a face-to-face, so near that God can wipe the tears from it himself. Let me bring this all the way down out of the sky, into something you already know in your body. Picture the arrival's gate at an airport, the doors that slide open, over and over, letting travelers out. And picture the crowd waiting on the other side, the whole restless mass of strangers, everyone scanning, everyone searching. And then picture the moment, the one you've lived, or watched, or ached for. When someone in that crowd sees the face they've been waiting for come through the doors. Nobody has to tell them which face. Nobody hands them a photograph to check against. Across a sea of strangers, in a fraction of a second, the heart knows, and the whole body moves, before the mind has even caught up. That is what recognition looks like. It is faster than thought. It is deeper than reason. You do not learn how to know the face of someone you love. You just know. Now tell me this. If the human heart can do that in a crowded terminal, pick one beloved face out of 1,000 in half a heartbeat, what on earth makes us think it will suddenly forget how at the threshold of eternity? Everyone pictures heaven as a place. What they miss is that in the Bible, heaven is almost never described first as a place at all. It is described as a reunion. It is the arrival's gate at the end of the world, and it is your face the ones who went ahead are watching the doors for. If this study is meeting you somewhere real tonight, if something in here is loosening a grief you've been carrying, this is exactly why this channel exists. To go slowly and honestly through what the text actually says. If that's what you've been looking for, take a moment to subscribe so the next study finds you when you need it. And if it fits your heart, share this with someone who is missing someone right now. There's still one thing left to say, and it's the part that matters most. So let's pull the whole thread together, because it runs unbroken from the front of the Bible all the way to the back. An old man named Abraham breathes his last, and the text says he is gathered to his people, carried home to a family that was already waiting for him. A grieving king named David stands up off the ground, where he has been weeping, and says of his dead son, with total calm, "I shall go to him." Jesus opens a window into the world beyond death and shows us a man who still knows every name, still remembers his 5 brothers, still loves the family he left behind. The risen Christ walks out of his own tomb, scars and all, unmistakably himself, recognized the instant God allows the recognition. And John, the silent man on the mountain, who watched 2 dead saints stand fully alive, lives long enough to write the ending, a God who comes, so close he can wipe the tears from your face with his own hand. And when you set all of it side by side, a single picture forms. Not one time, not once, does the Bible treat the people you love as disposable. It never once describes them dissolving into a nameless blur. From the first book to the last, the picture it keeps painting is the same one, gathered, sleeping, waiting, alive. So what does all of that mean for you, right now, tonight, wherever you're sitting, as you listen to this? Here's the first thing. Grief is not the same as goodbye. There's a reason the New Testament keeps calling death sleep. When Paul writes to a grieving church, he doesn't say their loved ones are gone. He says they have fallen asleep. The Greek word is koimao, to sleep, to drift off, and it is a word that assumes a mourning. It assumes a waking. In fact, the early Christians took that word so seriously that they gave the world a brand new name for a burial ground. Our English word cemetery comes straight from the Greek koimeterion, which literally means a sleeping place, a dormitory. To the very first believers, a graveyard was not a place of endings. It was a room full of people sleeping until the morning came to wake them. So when the ache hits you, and it will, remember what the ache actually is. The person you're missing has not been erased from existence. They have gone ahead, the way David's little boy went ahead, into the presence of a God who is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Your grief is real, and you are allowed to feel every ounce of it. But it is the grief of distance, not the grief of a void. Here is the second thing. The love you're carrying was never wasted, and it is not lost. The relationships that shaped you, the mother, the father, the child, the friend, the face you would know anywhere on earth, those are not deleted at the door of eternity. If a fisherman could recognize Moses on a mountain, a man he had never once met, then you will know the people you spent your whole life loving. The fog will lift. The dim mirror will finally clear. And you will see them, as Paul promised, face to face, and know them, at last, completely. And here's the third thing, the last thing, the one I most need you to hear. Every passage we walked through tonight was written to comfort somebody who was hurting in exactly the way you may be hurting right now. Paul did not hand the grieving church at Thessalonica a philosophy lecture. He handed them a reunion and told them, plainly, comfort one another with these words. So if you are the one grieving tonight, hear this, it was written for you. But there is one more turn, and it's the thing I can't stop thinking about. This whole time, you've been asking the frightened question, will I know them? Will I recognize their face? And that is a good question, and the Bible answers it, with a yes you can lean your whole weight on. But look again at every reunion we saw, and you'll notice something. The rich man, in torment, straining to reach 5 brothers he could not stop loving. David, certain he would go to a son who had gone ahead. 2 dead saints on a mountain, waiting in the light. In every single one, the love runs in both directions. The ones who went ahead did not forget us. They remember. They love. They wait. So maybe the question was never quite right. It was never only, will I recognize them? It was also this, someone is watching the doors for you. The person you are aching to see is not lost in some silent nothing, indifferent and gone. They are more like a face at the arrival's gate, scanning the crowd, waiting, ready to know you in an instant. You have spent so long afraid you might not find them. You never had to be, because they are already looking for you. And when those doors finally open, you will not be searching a sea of strangers. You will be the face someone has been waiting for. So let me ask you before we go, of all the reunions we walked through tonight, Abraham gathered home, David going to his son, the risen Christ in the garden, the promise John saw on Patmos, which one reached you the deepest? And who is the person you are waiting to see again? Tell me their name in the comments. Say it out loud, right here. Sometimes writing the name down is its own small act of hope. And if this study opened something up for you, if it put words to something you've been carrying alone, help us get it to someone else who needs it tonight. Subscribe so the next one finds you. Leave a comment, even a single word. It helps more grieving people find this than you'd ever guess. Share it with someone who is missing someone right now. And if you would, say a prayer for us as we keep going, slowly and honestly, through this book. Because the tomb was never the end of the story. It was only ever a sleeping place. And morning is coming.